Former President Trump's eldest daughter, Ivanka Trump, testifying in her family's $250 million civil fraud trial. She is the fourth and final member of the Trump family to give testimony on the witness stand, following her brother and her father and both of her brothers, Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump. So I want to now bring in our ABC News senior investigative reporter, Aaron Katersky, who's been following this for us. So, Aaron,
the FBI just walked into a Trump Tower property and executed a federal search warrant. Not a request, not a subpoena, a full raid. Badge, warrant, and agents. Inside a building that has the sitting president's name printed in gold letters on the outside. And here's what nobody is telling you clearly enough. This did not happen because of politics. This happened because a federal judge looked at the evidence and said, yes, there is probable cause that a crime occurred here. A judge, on the record, under oath to the law. Now, while that was unfolding in Florida, something else was happening simultaneously. Something that takes this story from a real estate scandal into full national security territory. Federal investigators have quietly reopened their examination of Ivanka Trump's international business deals. Vancouver, Panama, overseas luxury developments where she was not just a background figure, she was the face. She flew there, she cut the ribbons, she posted the photos, she made the speeches. So here are the questions you need to be asking right now, and I want you to drop your answers in the comments below. The FBI needed a judge to sign this warrant. Trump controls the Justice Department. His own government raided his own building. Trump supporters, I'm waiting. Explain this in the comments without using the words witch hunt. Go. If Obama's daughter had overseas business deals being investigated by the FBI for money laundering while Obama was president, would you be this calm about it? Be honest. Comments are open. Ivanka had a White House security clearance and was promoting international real estate deals to foreign investors at the same time. If your name isn't Trump, you'd already be in prison. Agree or disagree? Fight me in the comments. We are going to answer every layer of this story today. The raid, the shell companies, the Russian nationals, the money trail, Ivanka's deals, and the question that ties all of it together. Is this just another news cycle? Or are we watching the slow unraveling of something that has been hidden in plain sight for decades? Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you will understand exactly what is happening and why it matters far more than most people realize. What actually happened in Florida? Let's start with the facts on the ground, because the details here matter enormously. On a Thursday morning in Sunny Isles, Florida, a stretch of South Florida coastline known for gleaming high-rise towers and the kind of money that does not advertise itself, FBI agents arrived at a Trump-branded beachfront property. They did not knock politely. They did not send a letter requesting documents. They executed a federal search warrant. They went directly to Unit 4102. The unit belongs to two Russian nationals, Oleg Petulia and Andrei Makarov. If those names don't immediately ring a bell, that's understandable. They are not household names, but their financial arrangements tell a story that federal investigators have apparently found extremely compelling. These two men are linked to a corporate entity called MIC USA LLC. Now, if that name sounds like it was designed by a computer program to sound as generic and untraceable as possible, that might not be an accident. Shell companies are used for all kinds of purposes, some of them entirely legitimate. But this particular shell company has been circling in legal trouble. Lawsuits have been filed against it. Suspicious financial transactions have been alleged. The kind of paper trail that makes federal investigators start pulling at threads. And when you follow those threads, when you trace the money from this single condo unit in Sunny Isles to the broader network of Trump-branded properties that have been purchased by foreign buyers with complicated financial backgrounds, a pattern starts to emerge. One that is very difficult to wave away as coincidence. Two Russian nationals, one shell company, one Trump Tower condo, FBI warrant signed by a federal judge. And people are still saying this is just a coincidence? I'll wait. Defend that in the comments. I dare you. The FBI did not show up at this building on a hunch. Federal agents don't operate that way. To execute a search warrant, you must first go before a federal judge, present your evidence, demonstrate probable cause that a crime has been committed, and convince that judge, an independent officer of the court, to sign off on the action. That process has multiple layers of oversight. It requires real evidence. It is not something that happens because a political opponent made a phone call. Whatever the FBI had when they walked through that door, it was substantial enough to clear that bar. And that tells you something important about where this investigation stands. It is not in its early stages. This is a targeted action built on evidence that has already been gathered and reviewed. The history that makes this bigger than one condo. Here is why this single raid in Florida opens into something far larger. Back in 1984, 30 years before Trump ever announced a presidential campaign, a man named David Bogatin walked into Trump Tower in New York. He was a Russian immigrant with documented ties to powerful criminal networks in Russia, and he sat down and bought not one apartment, not two. He purchased 5 condominiums in Trump Tower in a single transaction. The state attorney general later determined that those purchases were used to launder money, and Trump Tower at the time was one of only 2 buildings in New York City where anonymous buyers could use shell companies to purchase condominiums. No name required, just a corporate entity and a wire transfer. That was 1984. The pattern did not stop there. Over the following decades, reporting from USA Today, The New Republic, and multiple other investigative outlets documented a recurring story. Trump-branded properties repeatedly attracting buyers connected to Russian organized crime, corrupt oligarchs from former Soviet republics, and individuals whose money had origins that did not hold up to scrutiny. At least 10 such businessmen were eventually linked to Trump properties across various investigations and court documents. Trump's consistent defense has been the same each time. He doesn't know the buyers. His company licenses the name, collects the fees, and has no involvement in individual transactions. He's not the one selling condos. He's selling the brand. On a surface level, that is a defensible position. Brand licensing is a legitimate business model. You cannot reasonably expect someone who licenses their name to vet every individual who eventually buys a unit in a building that uses that name. But here is where that defense starts to develop serious cracks. When your name is the brand, when your face is in the marketing materials, when your family members fly to opening ceremonies and serve as the public faces of these developments, when you personally attend launches and give interviews promoting these projects, the claim of total ignorance becomes harder to defend with each passing incident. The Trump Organization is not a small operation run by people who don't understand how international luxury real estate works. They have operated in these markets for decades. They understand that certain types of buyers use certain types of corporate structures. They understand what red flags look like. They have lawyers. They have compliance teams. They have accountants. So when journalists start publishing reports about suspicious buyers in Trump buildings, when lawsuits allege financial misconduct by shell companies connected to those buildings, when federal investigators open inquiries into whether those buildings were used to launder money, the argument that nobody inside the organization noticed anything becomes progressively more difficult to accept at face value. Trump says, "I don't know the buyers." His buildings, his name, his brand, his marketing, his family at the grand openings, but he doesn't know the buyers. Pick a side. Is he lying, or is he the most clueless businessman in history? Both options are bad. Comment section, go. Part 3. How money laundering through luxury real estate actually works. Let me take a moment to explain the mechanics here, because understanding how this scheme operates is essential to understanding why luxury real estate keeps appearing in these investigations. Money laundering through real estate is not a new concept. It is one of the oldest and most reliable methods for cleaning dirty money anywhere in the world. And luxury real estate in particular is almost perfectly engineered for the purpose. Here is how the basic scheme works. You start with money that originated from illegal activity, corruption, organized crime, fraud, drug trafficking, sanctions evasion, whatever the source. That money cannot simply be deposited into a bank without triggering questions, and it cannot be spent freely without creating a trail back to its origins. So instead, you route it through a series of shell companies and corporate structures. Layer after layer, each one adding distance between the money and its source. The funds move through different jurisdictions, different accounts, different entities, each transfer making the trail a little harder to follow. Eventually, those funds are used to purchase a high-value asset, a luxury condominium in a prestigious building with a globally recognized brand name attached to it. The money is now tied to a legitimate piece of physical property. The asset appreciates over time. When you eventually sell it, the proceeds come back to you as clean, legitimate income from a real estate transaction. Nobody questions it. Wealthy people buy and sell luxury properties all the time. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is documented financial crime methodology. Law enforcement agencies around the world have been struggling to combat it for decades. In South Florida, with its international banking connections, its culture of discretion around wealthy foreign buyers, its constant churn of new luxury developments, and its significant flows of money from Russia and former Soviet states, has become one of the most active hotspots for exactly this type of activity. Not every Russian buyer is a criminal. That is obvious and important to state clearly. But when you observe patterns, when certain shell companies keep appearing in property records, when the same corporate structures show up across multiple transactions in multiple buildings, when lawsuits start alleging financial misconduct involving the same names and entities, those patterns tell investigators a story that individual incidents cannot. The raid on Unit 4102 appears to be one piece of that larger pattern, and the fact that it sits inside a Trump-branded building, a brand that benefits financially from every sale regardless of who the buyer turns out to be, is precisely what transforms this from a straightforward criminal investigation of two Russian businessmen into something with potentially much wider reach. Ivanka, the intersection of business, politics, and federal scrutiny. Now let's talk about Ivanka Trump specifically, because her role in the story sits at a particularly sensitive intersection of business, government, and potential legal exposure. Ivanka has long been positioned as the polished, professional face of the Trump brand, the version of the family enterprise that could appeal beyond the base. She had her own fashion line. She wrote a best-selling book aimed at working women. She cultivated an image of sophistication and competence that made her a genuinely valuable asset both to the Trump organization and to her father's political operation. When Trump won the presidency in 2016, Ivanka did not stay home to run the business. She went to Washington. She became a senior White House advisor. She received a full security clearance. She sat in meetings with heads of state and senior government officials. She represented the United States government on the international stage, all while maintaining connections to the Trump organization and its ongoing business dealings worldwide. The ethical concerns this arrangement raised were not theoretical. They were immediate and structural. A senior White House official with security clearance and policy influence was also connected to a family business that was actively conducting deals with foreign entities, foreign investors, and, as investigations later suggested, individuals with ties to foreign governments whose interests did not necessarily align with American interests. The potential for foreign actors to exploit those business relationships as a back channel for influence was not a hypothetical risk. It was a built-in structural vulnerability. One of the projects that drew the most intense investigative attention was the Trump Tower development in Vancouver. Ivanka was deeply personally involved in this project. She traveled there multiple times. She attended the grand opening. She posted about it publicly. She served as the face of a development that was, according to subsequent reporting, financed through arrangements that raised significant questions. Who were the investors behind this project? Were foreign entities involved who might have had motivations beyond simply earning a return on a real estate investment? Was the Vancouver development used as a vehicle for moving money across borders in ways that might not survive close legal examination? These questions were serious enough that the FBI opened a counterintelligence investigation specifically focused on whether foreign governments or foreign actors were attempting to use Trump Organization business deals to build leverage over members of the Trump family who held positions inside the White House. A counterintelligence investigation is not the same as a criminal probe. It is focused on national security, on understanding whether adversaries are exploiting vulnerabilities to gain influence over American government officials. The fact that Ivanka's business dealings were the subject of such an investigation indicates that the FBI believed there was a potential national security dimension to what was occurring. That investigation did not result in public charges. It lost momentum as other news stories consumed the cycle. But investigations of that nature do not simply disappear. They remain in files. They wait for new evidence. They wait for connections to other cases to surface. They wait for a moment when accumulated information reaches a threshold that justifies renewed action. And now, with FBI agents executing a search warrant on a Trump Tower condo in Florida connected to Russian nationals and their shell company, those dormant questions about Ivanka's international deals are suddenly very much alive again. Ivanka Trump, White House advisor, top-level security clearance, sitting with foreign heads of state. Also, promoting luxury real estate deals overseas to foreign investors at the exact same time. And people call this normal? Name one other country where this would be acceptable. I'll wait. Comments, now. Why this is different when Trump is the president. Here is the point in this story that most people are not fully processing. Donald Trump is the sitting president of the United States. He is not an outsider fighting against the establishment. He is the establishment. His administration runs the Justice Department. His appointees oversee the FBI. The entire chain of command of federal law enforcement ultimately reports to his executive branch. That reality fundamentally changes how you have to interpret this raid. The argument that worked during Trump's first term, that investigations targeting him were the product of a politically biased deep state trying to sabotage his presidency, cannot be applied in the same way when the man his supporters believe is being persecuted is simultaneously the person who controls the institutions doing the investigating. For the FBI to execute this search warrant under these circumstances, the evidentiary basis would need to be airtight. Federal judges do not sign warrants based on political motivations. Career prosecutors do not stake their professional reputations on cases they believe are weak. FBI field agents do not plan and execute raids on high-profile properties in buildings with the president's name on them without serious institutional confidence that the action is legally sound. Something real is driving this investigation forward. And the political defense that has historically protected the Trump family from the full consequences of these inquiries is, in this particular moment, significantly weaker than it has ever been. Trump is the president. Trump controls the DOJ. Trump's own government just raided Trump's own building. The deep state excuse is dead. So Trump supporters, what's the new story? Drop it below. Critics, respond to them. Let's go. Part 6. The Civil Fraud Trial. What Ivanka already admitted. Before we look forward, it is worth looking back at what has already been established on the record. Ivanka Trump testified in the $250 million civil fraud trial brought by the New York Attorney General against the Trump Organization. She was the fourth and final member of the Trump family to take the witness stand, following her father and both of her brothers. The Attorney General described Ivanka as cordial, friendly, and composed on the stand. A noticeably different presentation from some of the other family members who testified before her. But composed does not mean unscathed. During that testimony, Ivanka acknowledged that she received $4 million from the Trump Organization's sale of the old post office building in Washington, D.C., which had been converted into a luxury hotel. That building sold as part of a $139 million transaction. The Attorney General's position was that those proceeds represented the fruits of fraud, because the original financing the Trump Organization received to acquire and develop the property was obtained using fraudulent financial statements that dramatically overstated the value of Trump's assets. In other words, the money Ivanka received came from a transaction that was, according to the AG's office, built on a fraudulent foundation. Whether she knew the financial statements used to secure that financing were false is a separate question. But the money she personally received is directly traceable to those allegedly fraudulent deals. This is the context in which the new federal activity is unfolding. The civil fraud case established that the financial practices of the Trump Organization were not clean. The federal investigation now appears to be examining whether those financial practices extend to potential criminal money laundering activity connected to foreign buyers and Russian nationals. The pattern that cannot be dismissed. Let me step back and look at the full picture because the accumulation of incidents here is itself significant. In 1984, a Russian national with ties to organized crime buys 5 condos in Trump Tower. The state AG later rules those purchases were used to launder money. Over the following decades, investigators and journalists document at least 10 individuals with connections to Russian organized crime or corrupt former Soviet oligarchs who purchased units in Trump-branded properties. USA Today conducts a comprehensive review of court records, legal documents, and government filings. The conclusion? Trump, his company, and partners repeatedly turned to Russian nationals and individuals from former Soviet republics, several with alleged organized crime connections, as his empire expanded. The New Republic publishes an investigation with an even sharper finding, that Russian criminal enterprises used Trump properties not merely as real estate investments, but as active bases of operation for money laundering on a significant scale. The FBI opens a counterintelligence investigation into Ivanka Trump's international business deals while she holds a White House position. The New York Attorney General proves in civil court that the Trump Organization used fraudulent financial statements to secure hundreds of millions in financing. And now, a federal search warrant executed inside a Trump Tower property connected to 2 Russian nationals operating through a shell company with its own legal troubles. Each individual incident, viewed in isolation, can be explained away, dismissed, labeled as coincidence or political attack. But the pattern viewed in full, stretching across 4 decades, across multiple properties, across multiple investigations, across multiple jurisdictions, is not easily dismissed by rational observers. 1984, 1990s, 2000s, 2010s, 2016, 2020, 2025. Same pattern, same buildings, same Russian money, same I don't know anything. At what point is it not a coincidence anymore? Give me a number. How many times does this have to happen? Put it in the comments. And Trump supporters, I genuinely want your answer too. Part 8. What comes next? The range of outcomes. Where does this go from here? What are we watching for? The range of possible outcomes is genuinely wide, and it depends entirely on what the FBI recovered from that condo and where the evidence leads. At one end, the investigation could remain focused narrowly on Petulia and Makarov themselves. Whatever triggered the warrant might be specific to their transactions, their shell company, their particular financial activity. The Trump Organization could emerge from this with nothing more than another round of uncomfortable headlines and reputational damage that its supporters will shrug off and its critics will amplify. This outcome is entirely plausible. Federal investigations frequently start broad and narrow down as evidence develops. Not every inquiry that begins with a Trump connection ends with charges against the Trump family. But there are other possibilities. If evidence shows that money laundering did occur through this and other Trump-branded properties, and if documentation or testimony emerges indicating that someone within the Trump Organization was aware of or willfully blind to that activity, the legal exposure expands enormously. If Ivanka's involvement in international projects like Vancouver is shown to have intersected with the same financial networks under investigation, if the dormant counterintelligence inquiry connects to the active criminal investigation, her exposure increases as well. And if any of this points back to Trump himself, if there is documentation suggesting personal knowledge of or personal benefit from illicit financial activity conducted through his branded properties, the implications would be historic. Even in the scenario where no criminal charges are ever filed against any member of the Trump family, the political damage accumulates. The pattern does not go away. The questions do not disappear. And the American public's right to understand whether the presidency has been compromised by foreign financial entanglements does not expire. What this all means. Here is the bottom line. The FBI raid on Trump Tower's Sunny Isles is not an isolated event. It is one visible action in what appears to be a much longer, much deeper investigation that has been building for years. The raid represents federal investigators moving from the information gathering phase into physical evidence collection. That is a significant escalation. It means what they already have on paper is compelling enough to justify the exposure that comes with physically searching a high-profile property in a building with the president's name on it. The simultaneous reopening of scrutiny on Ivanka Trump's international business dealings suggests that investigators are pulling on multiple threads simultaneously, looking for connections between the foreign buyers in Florida, the international development deals Ivanka promoted, and the broader pattern of Trump-branded properties appearing in financial crime investigations. Whether those threads ultimately lead where investigators hope, or whether they dead end without producing criminal charges, we do not yet know. Federal investigations of this scale and complexity operate on timelines measured in months and years, not news cycles. But what we do know is this. The story is not over. The investigation is active. The evidence threshold for a search warrant has already been met, and the questions about the Trump family's financial entanglements with foreign money, questions that have been circulating for 4 decades, remain very much unanswered. This one will break your comments section. Here's what I think happens next. Nothing. No charges, no accountability, no answers. The pattern continues and everyone moves on. Prove me wrong. If you think justice actually comes from this, tell me exactly how and why below. And if you agree with me that nothing will happen, say that too. Let's see which side wins the comments. Go. If this breakdown gave you something to think about, share it. The more people understand the actual mechanics of what is happening here, the better equipped we all are to evaluate what comes next.